You have been in Accra so many times, I suppose you could almost think of it as one of your many homes around the African continent with which you're very familiar, for the third Africa Prosperity Dialogues for 2025, the first one having been in 2023. Were you encouraged by what you heard at APD, at the Accra International Conference Centre?
Yes, indeed. I was very encouraged at the Accra International Centre when we had the Africa Prosperity Dialogues. What was encouraging was that there was a lot of business people, but also policymakers trying to work out how they can work together. And also there were financial institutions, development institutions, because the theme was invest, connect, integrate. And basically we were looking at how we should work to invest in infrastructure, how we can connect through infrastructure and integrate. Because the unity of Africa will never be practical unless we can connect our cities, we can connect our ports, we can connect through rail and connect through air. So, but we can never be able to trade amongst ourselves if we don't produce. And for us to produce, we must have energy. Because without energy, no factory runs. So the infrastructure is very important, but we are also looking at social infrastructure, because at the end of the day, human capital is the key. So education, skills is very important to complete the value chain of what we want to do. So there were lots of ideas coming out about financing the infrastructure, because there is a calculation that there is a gap of more than 100 billion a year.
Every year,
Every
shortfall of 100
more
million
than
plus.
100. Yes. So we're looking at different ways of how to close that gap. One, we were saying countries themselves must look at pension funds, because there are countries that are already using pension funds to build infrastructure. Looking at pension funds, looking at sovereign wealth funds, looking at insurance, but also at the development in finance institutions, how can they help? But we were also saying we have Africans who live in the diaspora who could actually invest also in infrastructure. But in addition to Africans in the diaspora, we have Africans on the continent who could equally contribute and invest in infrastructure. So there was an idea of establishing a continental infrastructure fund that can benefit from Africans on the continent investing, the diaspora investing, and other partners. And that way, then we build these common assets that we need. For instance, we've long talked about Inga.
The Great Inga Dam.
Yes.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo.
But we just talk. And we have said Inga can supply electricity to more than 7 countries, even more. But why can't we come together as Africans? Nobody is going to come and develop Africa for us. if we don't develop it, nobody's going to do it. So why don't we come together as African countries and citizens and say, let's build this hydro and make sure we have an asset that can supply clean energy from our own continent by ourselves, and it supplies electricity to a lot of countries on the continent. We've been talking, why can't we do it? Those were the discussions that were taking place.
Well,
we also have minerals. All the minerals that other countries have used to become developed countries, we have. They come from us. We send them raw. And when we send them raw, we send jobs with those raw materials, because then they are beneficiated in those countries. We send what? We send revenue, because by the time they come back as finished goods, they are probably 100 times the amount that we sold them for. So let's stop sending jobs out when we need them on the continent. Let's stop sending revenue. Let's beneficiate our minerals. Let's process our natural resources on the continent. But the other thing that was also discussed, if you look at the world, 60% of still available arable land is on our continent. But our continent spends billions importing food. We should be ashamed of ourselves, really. We have the land, we have the sun, we have water, we have the people. Let's grow our own food and consume what we produce, and spend those billions in education, in health, and in other things, instead of importing food. Also, by 2050, we're going to have the majority of young people on this continent.
The majority of young people in the world?
Yes. They'll be on this continent. So we need to invest in them now. We need to ensure that they get their education and their skills, concentrating on science, technology, engineering, of course arts as well, maths, so that they are ready for the jobs of the future. It's very important that we do that. A skills revolution, the African Union Agenda 2063 talks about a skills revolution on the continent, so that we stop seeing young people trying to cross to Europe out of desperation, not out of choice, looking for greener pastures. Let's have the greener pastures here. So women must also be empowered, because no continent can ever develop to its full potential unless its women and young people are fully participating in the economic activities, in education, in social activities, in health. Health was also discussed quite strongly, because if you are not healthy, there is nothing you can do, really. Health is very important. So it's important to make sure that people are well nourished, they exercise, they prevent disease, but when they do fall sick, they have access.
Dr. Dlamini Zuma, you give a very comprehensive overview there of what was discussed at the Africa Prosperity Dialogues, and I don't think anybody listening to you would be in any way in disagreement with the blueprint that you set out for what Africa has to do if we are to survive in any palpable shape into the 21st century to compete with other parts of the world in any kind of meaningful way. But as was the theme of the Africa Prosperity Dialogues in its first year in 2023, it's all about taking the ambition to action. And with all the things that you've pointed out there, money always seems to be at the root of the problem, the idea of financing. You spoke about the idea perhaps of opening up pension funds, some countries already using pension funds to fund infrastructure development. The idea of global Africans being given some kind of more structured platform to invest there. We have our brethren in Northern Europe, in the Far East, in North America, notably. The sticking points usually seem to be in the detail of nation states wanting to protect their national interest, or feeling like they have a step ahead, a foot ahead already in the particular area, and so wanting to, if you like, hog the territory to themselves. For example, post-COVID, a lot has been made of why an economy like Ghana's suffered so badly from the effects of COVID shock, whereas our Francophone neighbours seemed to be less affected. Our Francophone neighbours being tied into a different economic system, tied to France and the French treasury and the euro, and therefore not suffering the effects of exchange rate fluctuations in the same way. How do you get African countries to move past the cushions and the special privileges perhaps that they've enjoyed under their old arrangements and move into this brave new future that you present, where we cooperate on level terms?
Well, I think our forebearers told us, and it's still true today, that if we unite and work collectively, we will be a strong force in the global arena. But if we work and act individually, we'll forever be weak like we are. So I think it's very important. We must start, I think your radio station and other media stations are very important also. Media. You should stop saying we are Ghanaian. I should stop saying I'm South African. I'm an African living in South Africa. We are a Ghanaian living in Ghana. Because every time you say I'm Ghanaian, you are already saying to me, you are not part of me. And every time I say I'm South African, I'm already saying to you, I'm not part of you. You see what I mean? We're Africans. We may be living in different parts of Africa, but we're Africans. I think the mindset, you know, the biggest prison is your mind. If the person who wants to control you controls your mind, they don't need a physical prison for you. So we must begin to see ourselves as Africans and understand that our strength is in our unity and our collective action.
You've spoken about this in the past in relation to the African passport, which of course is something that you have very much championed, a passepartout that allows Africans to move freely across the continent, because of course the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is premised completely on the idea of free movement of goods, services and people, crucially. So far, only 5 African countries having signed up to visa-free travel for people from all the other member states of the African Union, Ghana being the most recent under President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo. Always cited against the idea of free movement of people is the idea of security concerns. How do you see African countries or the AU and Africa as a whole getting past that resistance to the idea of free movement of people?
I think we should learn from other countries who have done it. Every country has its security architect, has its security personnel. Why are they there? They are there because they have to look after security. So I don't find it legitimate to say you can't use an African passport because of security. Security must be looked after, but the passport in itself is not an insecurity. But also, I think it's just an excuse as far as I'm concerned. We should really be able to. We'll be surprised how much we can do. We can actually be the strongest in the world if we were to really work together, use our resources together, train our young people. By 2050, the youngest continent will be this one, and the labor force will be on this continent. Let that labor force be skilled to develop the continent rather than to be drowning on the Mediterranean. We also need to use the digital technology that is there to connect us, but also to make even business easier, education easier. So there is a lot that is in there that we can utilize. And we also agreed in the dialogues that government must have frameworks for private-public partnerships. Because, for instance, there are lots of things that infrastructure that you can build through the PPEs. If it's properly regulated, properly structured, you can do a lot with business. So if we were to leave Ghana with that spirit and countries engage their businesses, they do PPEs, the international development agencies also support the infrastructure. I don't think it's impossible. Of course, it always seems impossible until it's done. But I really think it's possible. We never thought it was going to be possible, even to have the African Continental Free Trade accepted. I remember it's an ideal that our forebearers wanted, but it never went through. In 2015, we decided to launch the negotiations. When the negotiations were launched, we said by end of 2017, the negotiations must be done. And everybody said, oh, how naive. She's very naive. She doesn't know that trade negotiations take a long time, could take a decade.
This was when you were AU chair.
Yes. But indeed, by 2017, it's not God-given that it should take long. By 2017, end of 2017, it was done. 2018, countries were beginning to sign. So it's the political will, it's the dedication and the commitment that is needed, and things can happen.
I was going to ask you where this great sense of optimism on your part comes from. Obviously, partly your experience as chair of the African Union Commission that you mentioned there, the surprise of seeing how willing African governments are to take up at least the notion of African free trade, free movement of goods, services and people. As you say, it's all about how we actually now do it, make it real. I would presume that your sense of optimism also comes from your experience in South Africa as somebody who has lived through the great change that South Africa has undergone from an apartheid, which seemed unshakable, through the first all race elections to what is now a stable democracy. And of course, your own experience in government and through all the ups and downs that there have been in South Africa now being under a coalition government. A lot is spoken about lately in South Africa in relation to the state of its infrastructure. Two noted academics from Selplehi University recently writing a paper about what they think South African provincial governments will need to do to resurrect or rehabilitate what, by African standards, is a very well-established infrastructure. You have an industrial base. You are precisely the kind of country that has achieved the kinds of things that a country like Ghana wants to achieve, not just exporting the raw materials, but producing manufactured goods using your own resources, refining your products before you export them. Looking at South Africa and other African countries which are at the stage of thinking about how they renew their infrastructure, Egypt is another notable example of that. What do you think we can learn from each other about how we get ourselves back onto the footing where we are able to create the jobs for the young people and boost our economies again and start trading with each other?
Well, I think South Africa is no exception. We have a high youth unemployment ourselves. And of course, our infrastructure is old, and we plan to renew it, whether it's social infrastructure, water infrastructure, for instance. We lose water before it gets to the consumer because the pipes may be leaking. So that means you are wasting money, but also water is not getting sufficiently to the end user. So that's one area of infrastructure that needs a lot of repairing. The roads, of course, are a permanent feature because they have to be maintained. But I think no country in the world, as far as I can see, has ever really developed without proper rail. And all of us need to understand that and build rail and not think all our goods must be cargoed by trucks, because the trucks are slow, they have to be many, and they also damage the road besides the accident that they may cause. So I think all of us need to pay attention to rail to the ports. But also there was a question in the dialogue from somebody who said the roads in the cities are getting so crowded. Why can't we have trains transporting people as well instead of just cars? So rail is important both as infrastructure for transport for people, but also for goods. For goods going between and amongst countries, but also going to the ports, to the world, and between cities. So I think we mustn't lose sight of rail. And as I said, infrastructure needs to be built, needs to be maintained. Because if you build it and it decays, then you lose it.
So how does a country like South Africa propose to do this? Through the public-private partnerships that you mentioned earlier on, through special taxes of its citizens? What do you think are the tools, or is there no one tool to address the problem? Is there a set of tools?
I think there isn't one silver bullet. There are different tools. There are PPEs. When I was Minister of Health, some of the hospitals we built through PPEs.
Public-private partnerships.
Public-private partnerships. We also use the pension funds to invest into infrastructure, besides also getting the development financial institutions like the South African Development Bank and so on So we use different, and I think everyone has to look at the different methods that are available. I don't think we can say they can only be just one way of funding that.
Yes. Importantly, you mentioned rail as a vital way of us easing the pressure on our roads, and also adopting a more serious wholesale approach to industrialization and the exploitation of, or if you like, allowing people the benefit of our natural resources. There is some criticism of some of the major infrastructural projects on the drawing board or even in action on the African continent at the moment. For example, there have been descriptions of the Inga Dam or critiques of the Inga Dam, although we can see the benefits for not only Central Africa, we have already buyers for off-takers for the power produced by DRC in West Africa. South Africa has already agreed to take some of the power from Inga Dam the third element, as soon as it's produced. But the thinking is that if this is going to enable the powering up of greater extractive industries, greater activity by the extractive companies in the Democratic Republic of Congo, what we should be thinking about is the processing of the resources in DRC, and not thinking, first of all, get them out of the ground, using the power, and then get them on, for example, a structure such as the Lobito Corridor, which seems entirely premised on the idea of getting raw materials out of Central Africa and to a port in Angola for export abroad. At the moment, no clear framework for processing or manufacturing before they're exported. How do you think we can get to the point of thinking about that thing of value addition before export? Or is it a case of it doesn't matter which happens first? You don't need the manufacturing plant first, get the railway done, and then build the manufacturing plants afterwards?
Well, I don't think we should say either or, but it is important to beneficiate and process our minerals. It's beneficial to us. One, we will create jobs that are so needed by our young people. Two, we'll get more revenue for those minerals once they are beneficiated, when we then sell them out. We still have to sell them to the world, it's fine, amongst ourselves, but let's beneficiate them and not sell them as raw. That's what we are saying. In terms of building the plants, of course, if you are going to beneficiate, there are things that you need. As I said earlier, you need energy, you may need water, you may need to have a particular plant, but let's do it. The other countries do it, why can't we? They do it with our raw materials. They beneficiate our raw material. Let's beneficiate our own raw material and send them finished products.
Dr. Dlamini Zuma, in conclusion, we're delighted to have had you in the studio, and thank you for giving us so much time. Can you tell us, though, on this visit to Accra, whether it was something that happened during the Africa Prosperity Dialogues at the Accra International Conference Centre, or whether it was something that happened outside? What for you has been the greatest note of hope from this visit to Accra?
Well, it's been just the interest in this topic, the interest of business. For me, gives me hope if they are going to go back and do what they were talking about. Of course, Accra, for me, I've seen it change over the years. Can you guess when I first came to Accra?
Oh, 1990?
1976.
Oh, wow.
was my first visit to Accra.
Oh, wow.
I was still a student then.
Oh, wow.
So you can see that I've seen it evolve over the years. And it's always nice to see it change for the better.
We're flattered.
But also, I must say, I've always found the Africans who live in Ghana very friendly, very Pan-African. Maybe it's the influence of the late President Kwame Nkrumah. I've always found them very warm, very welcoming. So I'm not saying it because I see you, but it's what I've experienced since then.
We're glad that the experience has been another positive one for you. We're honoured and we're very flattered that you should have taken the time out of your busy schedule. You'll be leaving Accra soon, I'm sure. Thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us for the Asaase Breakfast Show. Wishing you a safe journey back. Thank you so much, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma.
Thanks very much, and thanks to your listeners. And I hope you grow stronger and stronger.
Amen.
Thank you.